What would you do if you lost everything? Your children, your wealth, your health, all in a single day. And what if God allowed it? This is the true story of Job, a man so righteous, so faithful, that heaven itself noticed him. But that same faithfulness made him a target. Everything he loved was taken away. His family, his riches, even his health. Yet, in the middle of pain and suffering, Job refused to curse God. This is not just an ancient story. This is a test every believer will face. In the land of Uz lived a man named Job. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys. He had more servants than he could count. The Bible called him the greatest man among all the people of the East. But more than his wealth, Job feared God. Every single morning, he made sacrifices, not only for himself, but for each of his children, just in case they had sinned in their hearts. Job was wealthy, powerful, respected, but above all, he was faithful. One day, the angels came to present themselves before God, and Satan came with them. God asked Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered, "From roaming the earth, going back and forth across it." Then God said something that changes everything. "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." In that moment, heaven itself testified about Job. Satan sneered, "Does Job fear God for nothing? You have put a hedge around him, and blessed everything he has. Stretch out your hand, and strike everything he owns, and he will surely curse you to your face." God's response shocked heaven and earth. "Very well. Everything he has is in your power. But do not lay a hand on the man himself." At that moment, Satan left the presence of God and went straight to work. Then it happened, all in one single day. 4 messengers came to Job, each arriving before the last had finished speaking. The first messenger cried out. The Sabaeans attacked. They took all the oxen and donkeys, and killed the servants. Before he could finish, another messenger arrived. Fire fell from the sky, and burned up all 7,000 sheep. Not long after, a third messenger came running. The Chaldeans raided the land, and carried away all the camels. Everything Job owned was disappearing before his eyes. Then came the 4th messenger, the one that breaks every parent's heart. A mighty wind struck the house, where Job's sons and daughters were feasting. The house collapsed, and all 10 of his children died. In a single day, Job lost everything. When Job heard the final report, he did something no one expected. He stood up, tore his robe, and shaved his head, ancient signs of grief and mourning. Then he fell to the ground. But instead of cursing God, Job worshipped. And he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord." But Satan was not finished. He appeared before God once again, and God pointed to Job again. "He still holds fast to his integrity, even though you moved against him, to ruin him without reason." Satan replied, "Skin for skin. A man will give everything he has to save his own life. But stretch out your hand, and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face." God gave permission once again, but with one limit: do not take his life. So Satan went out and struck Job with painful sores, from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. Job took a broken piece of pottery and scraped his painful sores as he sat among the ashes. Then his wife came to him, broken by grief, broken by loss, and she said, "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die." She had lost everything too. her children, her home, her future. But Job answered her, "You speak like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God, and not trouble?" Even in unbearable pain, Job refused to turn against God. In all of this, Job did not sin with his words. 3 of Job's friends heard about everything that had happened to him, and they traveled from their distant lands to comfort him: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. But when they saw Job from a distance, they could barely recognize him. His suffering was written all over his body, and all over his face. They began to weep loudly. They tore their robes in grief, and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat beside him on the ground, for 7 days, and 7 nights, without saying a single word, because they saw that his pain was too great for words. After 7 days of silence, Job finally spoke. But it was not a prayer of victory. It was a cry of deep and unbearable pain. He said, "May the day of my birth perish. May darkness and gloom claim it forever. Why did I not die at birth? Why did I survive the womb? Now my sighing has become my daily food, and my groans pour out like water." Job was crushed, broken, exhausted by suffering. But this was not rebellion against God. This was lament. Raw and honest pain poured out before heaven, and God recorded every word. Eliphaz spoke first, and his words sounded wise at first. "Consider this: who being innocent has ever perished? Those who planned evil will eventually reap trouble." In other words, Job must have done something wrong. He must have deserved his suffering. But this became the oldest lie ever spoken about pain: the belief that suffering is always punishment, that every wound is proof of hidden sin. Job rejected their accusations, and answered from the depth of his grief, "If only my anguish could be weighed, if all my misery could be placed on the scales, it would outweigh the sand of the seas." Job was not hiding secret evil. He was drowning in sorrow. Then Bildad spoke. "Does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty twist what is right? When your children sinned against him, he gave them over to the penalty of their sin." The words cut deeply into Job's heart. Then came Zophar, even harsher than the others. "Know this: God has even forgotten some of your sin." 3 wise men. Yet all 3 misunderstood suffering. They believed pain always meant punishment. And even today, people still say the same things. Maybe you did not pray enough. Maybe there is hidden sin. Maybe God is punishing you. But Job refused every false comfort, because not every storm is a sign of God's anger. Sometimes, the righteous suffer too. Job grew bolder. He stopped arguing with his friends, and began speaking directly to God. "I desire to speak to the Almighty, and to argue my case before God." Even in his suffering, Job refused to walk away from God. Then he spoke words that would echo through history. "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. I will defend my ways before his face." This became one of the most powerful declarations of faith in all of Scripture. Not easy faith, not comfortable faith, but faith that holds on to God, even while bleeding, even while confused, even while suffering. Faith that dares to cry out to heaven, and still refuses to let go. In the deepest part of his suffering, Job spoke words that would echo through thousands of years of history. "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end, he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh, I will see God." Job had no New Testament, no knowledge of the cross, no understanding of Jesus as we know him today. Yet in the middle of unbearable pain, he spoke of a living Redeemer, and prophesied the resurrection. This was more than human hope. This was faith that transcended understanding, faith that could see beyond suffering, beyond death, and beyond the grave. A young man named Elihu had been listening to the entire debate, silently watching.
silently waiting. But now he was angry. Angry at Job for focusing more on defending himself than honoring God. And angry at the three friends because they failed to answer Job with true wisdom. Then Elihu finally spoke. I am young in years, and you are old. That is why I was afraid to tell you what I know. But true understanding does not come from age alone. It is the spirit within a person, the breath of the Almighty, that gives understanding. God speaks in many different ways. Now in one way, now in another, though people often fail to perceive it. Unlike the other friends, Elihu was never condemned by God, because sometimes wisdom comes from unexpected voices. Then at last, God Himself answered Job, out of the middle of a mighty whirlwind. But God's first words were not comfort. They were questions. Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Have you ever commanded the morning, or told the dawn where to appear? Have you entered the storehouses of snow, or walked through the gates of death? Can you bind the stars of the Pleiades, or loosen the belt of Orion? Question after question, God revealed the vastness of His wisdom, and the limits of human understanding. This was not cruelty. This was revelation. A reminder that behind suffering, there is a wisdom too deep for the human mind to fully contain. After God spoke, Job had only one response left. Not anger, not argument, but surrender. He said, I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I place my hand over my mouth. Then God spoke again, and Job answered once more. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I repent. In dust and ashes. This was not humiliation. This was encounter. The man who demanded answers from God had finally stood in the presence of God Himself. And after that moment, nothing would ever be the same again. Then God turned to Eliphaz and spoke words that stunned everyone. I am angry with you and your two friends, because you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has. Think about that for a moment. Job had cried out in pain, questioned God, and demanded answers. Yet God said Job spoke what was right. But the friends, who gave long and polished speeches about theology, were completely wrong. Then God gave them a command. Go to Job, and ask him to pray for you. The man who suffered would now intercede for the very people who wounded him with their words. Even in his pain, Job became a mediator of mercy. After Job prayed for his friends, the Lord restored everything he had lost. But God did more than restore. He doubled it. Job received 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 2,000 oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. Then his brothers, his sisters, and all his old friends came to visit him again. Each one brought him silver and a ring of gold. God blessed the latter part of Job's life, even more than the beginning. Job was given 7 more sons, and 3 more daughters, and his daughters were known as the most beautiful women in all the land. Then Job lived another 140 years, long enough to see 4 generations of his children. After all the suffering, after all the sorrow, God was not finished with Job's story. The story of Job answers one of the hardest questions every believer will ever ask. Why do good people suffer? The answer is not simple, but it is true. God is not absent in your pain. He is present, working through circumstances you cannot yet understand. Job's suffering was not punishment. It was purpose. His faith was tested beyond human limits. And yet his story became a testimony that would echo through generations. For thousands of years, people have looked at Job and found hope in the middle of suffering. Your trial is not the end of your story. It is the testimony God is still writing through your life. So if you are walking through your own storm today, hold on. Do not give up, because your Redeemer lives.